Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Andy RC and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Eachine Wizard X140HV. So I think this is Eachine's attempt at making a 3-inch version of their X220HV, with HV being an acronym of high volt, or to put it simply, 6S, and the X220HV didn't go down well for me. I kept getting what people call death rolls or flips of death on 6S. In fact, I wasted days and days trying different ESC settings, and people started making videos saying that they have found the cure. Well, regardless of any setting change that I made, for me, it was the violent maneuvers that would send the model into death rolls, so you could cruise around all day on 6S doing slow rolls and have no issues. You could even change some settings and go mad for 10 flights, but then on the 11th flight it would do a death roll, and my conclusion was that it couldn't be trusted on 6S. And from what I hear from you guys is that the majority of people who fly that model just fly it on 4S and use it as a beginner model, which is fine, but I think you can do a lot better for that price on 4S. The Skystar's Starlord, for example. Anyways, I digress, because here we have the 3-inch version, and it took me some time to come up with a consumer for it, and that's only if it actually flies safe. I've already heard reports of it doing death rolls on 6S, so if this one does the same, then I won't be recommending it because it's just not safe. But let's assume that everything is going to be fine, so are you ready? Because this is very specific. So I think this model is for somebody who wants a fairly cheap but powerful 6S 3-inch freestyle quadcopter that can top mount a battery but doesn't mind quite a bit of tinkering to get it going, and is also not too bothered about the 250 gram weight limit, because out of the box it is slightly over that with a 6S 550 milliamp equivalent Lipo. And the reason that I've come to that conclusion is I see a lot of comments in my videos that say I won't touch a model where I have to land on the battery, and there is a forfeit for that. You have to have a longer top plate, and that puts the weight of the model up. The problem is, though, I don't know where to start with this guy because it's not really doing anything that I want. I mean, I know from flying the HLRC Arrow that the lack of battery sag with 6S meant that it could carry a Session 5, so I guess we might have room for that with this model, but it would send it way over 250 grams. Now for me, this isn't a problem because even though I'm against having to pay and register or whatever we're going to have to do to get flying, I love this hobby way too much not to have to jump through a few hoops. And if you're not, I totally get it. And it's no secret either that my favourite 3-inch model is actually the GepRC Signet CX3. It's got a runcam split built into it, so we've got HD footage. It's a light 3-inch freestyle model with an all-up weight of 220 grams, and with a 650 milliamp 4S GMB LiPo, I can get over a 4-minute flight time with it. So when I see this Eachine, I think, why didn't they go for that? The answer is probably price. I will admit the Signet is expensive, but it's worth the money, and it's really fast as well. In fact, it ended up being faster than the Pro version, which had 1507 stator motors, just like this one, and that one was also over the 250 gram weight limit. Anyways, back to the Eachine, and let's talk about the frame. So, first of all, it's a unibody with really thick arms. However, they've cut the carbon in the wrong direction, so it bends really easily, which means it's going to break really easily. If we look at the popular HLRC XJB145, which also has a unibody, you could see that the weave of the carbon goes in the opposite direction to the Eachine, which makes it rock solid. Then we have this LED strip that goes all around the outer edge of the frame, and the carbon has been recessed so that it either tension fits or it's glued into the frame. These O-rings at the front and the back lead me to believe that it's just tension fitted, so if an arm bends, then I imagine the LED strip will pop out. This LED strip is connected to a dedicated board, which also has two much brighter LEDs that shine from underneath, and there's also a buzzer built into it. I think it was their original intention to have the buzzer fitting flush with the frame so that the board can sit a little lower, but as you can see, the buzzer doesn't quite line up with the hole, so they've had to raise it, which means that there's not really any room for a receiver. So they've left this servo wire hanging out of the back to connect to a receiver. I'm going to be using an XM Plus with pins soldered to it, but I'm going to have to get creative where to install it because there's no room. I'm thinking perhaps move the XT30 connector out of the way because it's running directly under the VTX, and if you remember from the X220HV, running the connector by the VTX caused a load of video noise. Then maybe I can do away with this back strap because first of all it's not long enough to go around the only 6S LiPo that will fit this model and is appropriate. So I think a prop would also hit it at this point because it's very close and this top plate isn't very wide either. Then perhaps I can raise the VTX a little bit higher and fit my receiver somewhere in there. But if it were me, I would have done away with these LEDs and the buzzer because we can use D-Shot commands, which I think might have just gotten this guy under 250 grams. Anyways, next let's talk about the motors. They are a 1507 2500 kV naked bottom brushless motor with a C-clip holding the bell in place. The motors feel really stiff to turn, which people mistake for being a good thing, but actually it's to do with the gap between the magnets. It gives off the impression that the magnets are really strong, which they are, but when there's a gap between the magnets there is a resistance there, so it kind of fools you really, because if there were no gap between the magnets then the motors would just turn smoothly. Now in reality the only thing that you have to be careful of with motors like this is the digital idle speed. You see, when you arm the motor, the ESC is programmed to give an extra jolt of power to get the motors spinning, but if you have your digital idle too low to do a fast maneuver or you have a fast rate, then it can cause the motor to have to completely stop to match that rate. And when the motors are not cheap like this, they are less likely to recover or start spinning again, and you will get a death roll. So along with that, and the fact that this HV Wizard line has previous when it comes to death rolls, I'm going to be pushing that digital idle speed high because it's set at 3.5% out of the box, which is a guaranteed death roll even without not cheap motors. Other than that, they are a good quality motor. They have got the equivalency right for a 6S Freestyle 3-inch model, so 2500 kV is the 4S equivalent of a 3750 kV motor. And just to compare, the HLRC Arrow 6S model, the Eachine has a wider stator and also a higher kV than the Arrow, and the Arrow 3 reached 105 mph, so I imagine on the Gemfan flash props you will get similar speeds. This one has come with the Dell 3056 props though, which are higher in pitch but don't produce as much thrust as the 3052 Gemfans, which is probably best for freestyle as it means you will get a longer flight time, but if it's speed that you're after then you can put the Gemfan flash props on and have at it. The thing that worries me though are the ESCs. They are a BL Halley S 4-in-1 rated at 20 amp and they look flimsy like the X220HV ESCs. There is also some lack of information on them because the specs say that they support from a 2 to 6S LiPo, but when you change the voltage input of an ESC then the amp rating also has to change. For example, the HLRC Arrow has a 45 amp rated ESC for 4S, but on 6S they are only rated to 35 amps, and that's because when you go up in volts the current goes down to achieve the same amount of power in watts. So if these ESCs are rated to 20 amps at 6S, then they should be fine, because our GMB 6S Lipo will only be supplying around 55 to 80 amps in total. But if that 20 amp rating is for 4S, then the 6S rating will be around about 14 amps per ESC. So if you times that by 4, that's 56 amps, which could be pushing it with a 6S Lipo. Now, I've tried to find more info on this stack, but it seems pretty generic. You can buy everything as a spare part, and it's all plug and play. And it looks like an Aurora RC stack, but I guess if we start getting desyncs and magic smoke, then we'll know what that 20 amp rating actually is. So the flight controller is an F4, and there is pretty much zero setup, to the point where the on-screen display has just been left blank. Its target is Maytech F411, and it's flashed with Betaflight version 3.55. It does have all of the ports set up correctly for smart audio, and the receiver was set up for S-Bus, but that's about it. Worryingly, on the website it mentions about not changing the firmware to the latest Betaflight version, which is also sending off alarm bells. I feel like I'm going to have to be really cautious with this one. I mean, you could fly it on 4S, but it will be pretty gutless, and there are far safer gutless beginner models than this one. So if this doesn't work on 6S, it's going to be a no from me. Then at the back we've got the VTX, which is power switchable from 25 milliwatt to 300 milliwatt. It has a button on the side, but again it uses smart audio, so I would just use that to change the channel and power. The antenna is connected to the VTX via a micro UFL connector with no adhesive, so that could easily pop off in a crash, and it's also not secured down, so I'll have to add a cable tie to the back, otherwise this is going to go straight into the props or pop off and burn up the VTX. Then lastly we have the camera up front, which is the CCD Foxeer Arrow Micro. It's a decent camera for sure, but I'd say it's the cheapest brand name camera that you can buy. And there's a problem. You see, something that I don't like about Foxeer cameras is that their on-screen display controller shares its ground with the ground of the camera, and Eachine have just decided to do away with it. So you can't change the camera settings, and they've left the camera's built-in on-screen display, which overlaps the Betaflight on-screen display. And that's perhaps why they have left all of the Betaflight on-screen display settings blank, hoping that you wouldn't notice and you would just use the camera's on-screen display. But the camera is connected to the 5-volt regulator from the flight controller, so the Copter's voltage will always just read 5 volts, so that is useless. Now I'm lucky because I have other quadcopters where the companies were more thoughtful and they have left the on-screen display connector installed, so I used my Hobbymate Comet along with its controller board to turn off the camera's on-screen display. Now I know they are working to a budget here, but for me this just isn't on. It makes the on-screen display completely useless. If you don't have another copter with this camera, then you're pretty much stuffed when it comes to turning that on-screen display off. You could of course buy a Foxeer harness and do some high maintenance soldering, but Eachine couldn't be bothered to have done that, and they've just used a RunCam connector because it fits their board that they have used. So yeah, I'm not getting good vibes from this one, which is why I haven't flown it yet, as it could come back in bits, but who knows, maybe it will surprise us all. So left in the box are 2 sets of props, a bunch of cable ties, some carbon spanners, then oddly a sandwich plate, I guess if you have to bottom mount the battery because the top plate isn't wide enough for your battery. Oh man, they just really haven't thought about it, have they? There looks like some foam landing feet and a thin rubber mat to hopefully stop the Lipo from sliding. Then we've got a bunch of spare screws and prop nuts, so let's try and get this thing all together and see what happens. So I've lifted the VTX from its standoffs and it's actually revealed a low ESR capacitor connected to the ESC board, and it's branded Rubicon, which is a good make, but it's only rated to 25 volts and 150 microfarads. So with 6S you really want to be rated to double the voltage, because it's to smooth out the voltage spikes, and that can be double the voltage of the Lipo itself, which is 25 volts. So double that and it's 50 volts. Now that's only if the ESCs don't have enough filtering themselves, and I'm only seeing 4 ceramic capacitors on board, so I'm a little bit worried about that. But my idea is to lift the XT30 connector around here. It looks like it'll just go around, and then I can actually lower the VTX, and then that'll mean my receiver can go on top of the VTX, and then I should be able to access the bind button, because if it goes between this board here and the VTX, I can't get to the bind button very easily. Now I do risk there being some RF noise given off by the electronics here, so I might get some noise through to my VTX by lowering it, but it's the only way that I can access my bind button. Okay, so it's about an hour later and I've managed to achieve everything that I said. So I have shortened the standoffs on the VTX, which has allowed room for my XM Plus, which just tension fits in there nicely and it misses the props. The props come very close to the frame, but if I wanted to rebind it, I could just pull it out and press the bind button. Then I've routed the antennas along the arms here on both sides, and I've also moved the XT30 around to the side here, and that comes underneath the battery strap, with the idea that the other XT30 connector will protect the balance lead so that that won't fly off into the props. I have then added a cable tie and also some heat shrink to the linear antenna so that that's not going to get caught in the props. And its all up weight is 267 grams, so it's 17 grams over the registration limit. I imagine if you did away with this LED board and the LEDs, you could potentially get it down to 250 grams. Now you're going to want to be using this 550 milliamp 6S if you are choosing to fly 6S, because its watt hour equivalent is almost identical to a 4S 850 milliamp battery, which is what you're going to want to be flying this on if it was a 4S model. So there isn't much room, as you can see, with the battery on there, and the props are just about missing everything. I think it would be a struggle to fit a Session 5 on there. You'd have to figure out a way how to not get the props hitting the battery by moving it further back. I've used a larger strap. Has to be a much larger strap because it's a really big battery, but I'm not gonna try and fly it with a Session 5 on the front yet, because I'm not even sure that it's going to fly at all. This Lipo mat isn't thicker than the screws that go into the standoffs, so it's pretty much doing nothing, and the screws are just gonna dig into this expensive 6S Lipo, so I'm gonna be putting a thicker one on there, I think, if it actually flies. Okay, let's see what happens with this guy. I'm standing back a little bit and I'm starting off in angle mode first of all, just to see if everything is fine when it's flying on low throttle, and it does seem to be. Not hearing any oscillations. I've given it a very similar tune to the Signet Pro because pretty much the same weight as that, but already I feel scared flying this thing. So the two people that I've seen have desyncs are Curry Kitten and Kebab FPV, and Curry Kittens was just on the throttle, so different than the X140HV, so he just went quick up on the throttle and it did a desync Kebab was a little bit different because he was carrying a session 5, I believe, which would mean that it would draw more current because it's carrying heavier equipment. So the first thing I'm going to try is actually go up on the throttle slowly rather than just give it a blast. But I'm going to stay well out of its way. Let's see what happens. Oh, no. That's bad. Disarm. Rearm. No. That was a straight desync, and it was from high up as well. I'd be very surprised. Have all the arms survived? Let's have a look. It seems so, but has it cut through the battery strap? Yeah, it looks like it's cut through the battery strap. That was just going up on the throttle slowly. Oh man, that's so disappointing. Alright, let me get and try and change some settings and change some battery straps and see if I could go again. Okay guys, this is demag compensation set to high, and also the startup power set to low, like Mr. Bardwell said himself in his fix for the Wizard HV. Now this seems to be doing something different. It's on the throttle. I'm just gonna go into acro, slowly up on the throttle, and it's doing acro. Seems to be a throttle issue, which would suggest motor timing, but I don't think that's the case. As I go up on the throttle, I am hearing slight oscillation, so even with the really low PIDs, seems like it's not enough. But I'm just giving small blips on the throttle and it's behaving. So I guess if you stay low on the throttle, it'll be okay on 6S. Okay, let's this time stay low and just give a punch of the throttle. It didn't even try. It did not even try. It just went no, gave up, and luckily that means that it's not broken. But I think that was just worse actually. Nothing actually cool. It got a bit of grass there, but other than that it is fine. But yeah, I don't think PIDs would do that. I just don't think this ESC can cope with 6S. So, you know, I could do some FPV with it and just cruise around like this. Actually, just going up on the throttle slightly there seems okay. I don't want to go too high though, because this grass isn't that long and it is just going to break one of those arms if it falls in the wrong place. But I cannot give it full beans. That's about as much as it'll give it. I think I've got the D down to about 16 and the P down to 30, so maybe it needs to come down lower than that. But the stock PIDs would be way worse. Stock PIDs, the D level is about 27, something like that, and of course this isn't Betaflight 4 that it's flying on, so we don't have any D-term min or anything like that. It is not dynamic. So I've sort of got it now on the throttle where I could say, yeah, I could give it about 60% throttle and it's behaving. But if I just come in front of me, well, not in front of me, let's give it full throttle, desync. Cannot recommend. Okay, so I've relegated the battery to a 4S. This is a Tattoo R-Line 850 milliamp 4S. I'm already needing more throttle, but it's not too bad. What are we at? Below 50% to get a hover. So let's see what happens when we go full up on the throttle like I was doing with 6S. Oh look, no problems. It's almost as if this ESC is a 4S ESC and not a 6S. And that's going up with more velocity, I would say, than the 6S. So just think that ESC can't take 6S, guys. I have changed the PIDs as well in between, so we're not getting any oscillations either. So that's a real shame. I mean, it's not completely gutless, but I think if you had a crash, those arms would bend very easily. So I'm afraid this time HV just stands for highly volatile. Look at that. Yeah, let's see if we can actually go mad with this thing on 4S and break it, but I don't think so. That's full throttle there. Again, Eachine just not providing the correct ESCs for the model. That's a shame. I suppose the silver lining is that you can fly it on 4S, but you know what? I still don't think I'd recommend it because I had to do all of that messing about, hoping that this was going to be a cool 6S model, and it's not. It's just a mediocre, slightly underpowered 4S model. It's got very weak arms, so if that's what you're into, then this is your guy, but other than that, it's not for me. And I'd be really scared flying it on 6S, even if I was just pottering around. I just didn't feel easy with 4S here. Doesn't have the power, but at least it's safe. Well, safe for now. Okay, one last try. Motor timing set to high. Going up very slow on the throttle. Gonna take it as far away from me as I can, preferably over some long grass. Full throttle, desync, fail. So I didn't bother fly it FPV on 6S because I thought it was just too dangerous. However, what I did have to do is drastically change the PIDs on the 4S battery, which is an 850 milliamp 4S. It's 1 gram lighter than the 6S Lipo, but I guess the difference in power required different PIDs. So these are the PIDs on the right hand side here, and yeah, I had to change them quite a lot. I still couldn't get it quite dialed in though for some reason. Just on the pitch axis I was getting a wobble. Now it was a very windy day, so it can either be that, or it could be maybe vibrations reaching the flight controller that's causing it because it's not soft mounted, or it could just be that I need to improve on the PIDs, but I thought I'd put those there. You know, if you have unfortunately bought this model, or you've bought it on purpose just to use with 4S, then maybe that's a starting point for you. The silver lining is that it does fly pretty good on 4S, and when you go up on the throttle, look at that, it's full throttle, the battery voltage doesn't sag because there's not enough power, and if you give it enough time, then you've got enough power to do, you know, inverted yaw spins and stuff like that. So, you know, if you have got this model, I would only recommend 4S. It is a death trap on 6S, but actually, you know what, it had enough power to have some fun, and the video feed is pretty clean. There's a little bit of interference and a little bit of electrical noise, but not enough to bother me, and as you can see, it's flying nicely. However, for me, I think I'd spend a little bit more money. I'd go with the XJB145. I think I might have seen some people actually top mounting a battery on that model, or I'd go with the Signet CX3 and then get the HD footage, but that is just my personal preference. Those models are more expensive than this one though. There's another silver lining with this as well. The 850 milliamp 4S Lipo actually got over a 5-minute flight time, I think. So I think if you went 4S and then went with a 650 milliamp 4S Lipo, you could get it under 250 grams and it'd be a good practice model. I say a good practice model, but I do think that that unibody is just going to break, and you can't see those LEDs. I was so busy concentrating when I was doing the line of sight flight on the desyncs that I forgot to mention that you can't even see the LEDs that go all the way around the frame. Anyways, I'll leave you with some flying. That is my verdict. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.
You say I make you nervous, a tragedy, I'm a beautiful disaster, a reckoning, you wonder how I got this way. You think I'm someone to be saved, someone to clean up and tame. Oh, some things never change, never change. You think I would look pretty on your arm once you cover up my bruises and battle scars, but it always ends the same. Can't bear the things I've had to face, got you crying on your knees in pain. Oh, some things never change, never change. You'll break your back to make me feel again, suffocate to make me breathe again, lose your mind from endless pain. Some things never change, never change. Redemption never came. I stopped asking for forgiveness, cause you should know only fools tread where the angels fear to go, but you keep trying to get too close. Save myself by turning into stone. You're